Growth Pod is brought to you by Genero, a leading growth agency in the Nordics. We interview marketing experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories and strategies behind profitable growth.
Today's guest is Riikka Söderlund. She previously held various marketing roles at Smartly.io, including VP of Marketing, and helped the company grow from 30 to over 100 million in annual revenue. She's currently the CMO of Katana, a startup that makes inventory management software and has raised over 50 million euros in funding. Welcome to the show, Riikka.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd be interested to learn about how you got started into this world of SaaS marketing.
Yeah, I think I kind of got started accidentally. It wasn't on purpose. I had a decade already behind me in the kind of more traditional marketing, you would call it, in agencies, ad agencies, media agencies. And having been working in marketing, then a company that does marketing tech like Smartly made perfect sense to me because we were marketing to marketers. I was the client, basically. So it was a very easy step. It wasn't a conscious choice that I want to work in a tech company. But once I started, I've never looked back. I love it. And this is what I was supposed to be doing all along.
So when you joined Smartly, like I just mentioned in the intro, it's a big success. For people who don't know, it's a Finnish company, right? So it's one of our big success stories. Yeah. Obviously, the product matters a lot, but presumably you also did a lot of things right when it came to marketing and demand generation. What would you kind of attribute that kind of success to? What did you do right at Smartly in terms of driving growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we did a lot of things right, but I think we also did a lot of things wrong. So I'm guessing the big success factor was that we were able to experiment and we were given that space to try different things and figure out what works and what doesn't, because that then allowed us to amplify those things that actually worked, amplify the messaging that works, the ads, the events, and that was a kind of an iterative approach in that sense. So definitely not a straight line success story. It was a lot of work.
Yeah, as these things always are. But looking from the outside, just looks like, wow, everything just keeps going up and to the right.
Yeah, I wish.
So one thing that we talked about off air, which I think Smartly did, obviously because it's a global company, we talked about the fact that Finnish companies tend to underinvest in marketing or look at marketing maybe just as an expense as opposed to an investment. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's something that I've been trying to figure out my entire career. If anyone's actually figured it out, please share with me as well. Why is that? Why is it that we don't see marketing as an investment like it is often seen in international companies? So of course, in this tech bubble where at Smartly and in my current role at Katana, we have international investors and they understand the value of marketing and how marketing drives growth. It's a lot easier in that environment to then also, like I said, experiment and actually kind of use that as a leverage and comment on how that actually drives business impact. Whereas if you have to start from scratch of kind of changing people's minds or attitudes, it's an uphill battle that I don't know how to win that battle.
I think that's a really good point, right? It's not, if you're in a company where the management team or the investors or the board does not have that perspective, for you as a CMO or marketing, whatever title you have, it's going to be a huge uphill battle to try to convince them that, this is actually what we need to do and it's working.
Yeah, exactly. And it's marketing is hard enough. You don't need to kind of have that extra layer on top of that, or at least I don't. My life is a lot easier this way.
I can understand that. You mentioned that Smartly, you were able to experiment and to understand what was working. And that there's an obvious question there, which is, how do we even know and measure what's working? What are we looking at? Is it just based on attribution? So can you talk about that? Because I feel like that's a really big sticking point, even in companies that should be able to measure a lot because it is a digital product, it's a digital buying journey. It's still a huge confusion as to what's actually driving the signups or whatever it is that we're tracking. So can you talk about how you think about that, measuring what's actually working?
I think there are two sides of that. I think the first piece is it's incredibly important to have internal alignment on what actually matters and what is it that we measure. It seems simple to say, okay, we'll look at LTV CAC, but if the management team hasn't actually sat down and discussed, well, how do we calculate our lifetime value? Which expenses do we put in our acquisition cost? What time frame are we like? If the alignment isn't there, then it's a meaningless number. So having internal alignment is absolutely the first step. But then the second one is probably also really company specific. So at Smartly, we were selling an enterprise product, which means long sales cycles and a lot of marketing touches, 27 touches on average between generating a lead and closing a deal. At Katana, we're selling a small and medium-sized business product. The average contract value is about 5,000. So a lot shorter sales cycle and a lot less marketing touches. So the attribution, of course, kind of varies a lot with these two different types of business models. And I am not a big believer on first touch attribution or any kind of too black and white world where you can pinpoint that this is the one thing that works. It's always a holistic view, but it does depend a little on the business setup that you're at, if that makes sense.
So companies that are thinking that, it's just about finding a tool that will give us the correct attribution or looking at a specific, the solution is not software based. It actually is about fundamentally understanding the business and doing that calculation. And marketing cannot do that alone. Like you need to get the CEO involved. And that should be
absolutely.
That should be the starting point, I guess, then for any discussion about thinking about marketing as an investment is actually knowing what the CAC and LTV reasonably are.
Absolutely. And understanding the attribution model holistically as well, and like understanding it the same way across the company. Concrete example, events are insanely expensive. So showing a positive LTV CAC or showing ROI on a specific event, a specific trade show, for example, it's virtually impossible to generate enough leads to actually do that. And yet those are incredibly crucial in an enterprise deal where relationships and just wining and dining our customers and partners is what actually drives business forward. So understanding that even attribution isn't black and white internally in the management team, incredibly important.
Are there any kind of tactics or specific ways that you think about attribution? Obviously, you can use different attribution software, but when you have something that's also, when a lot of touch points are happening offline and they're hard to quantify, how do you go about doing that?
Again, I think it comes down to that of a holistic understanding of what matters most. What are those touch points that matter most? And yes, we currently use HubSpot. Yes, I look at the influenced revenue number and see which assets and which channels influence revenue the most. But with at the back of my head, constantly also thinking that there are those channels that don't show up here. What could those be? And what kind of value could I attribute them? And again, that's a conversation. That's probably not a conversation with the management team, though. That's more a conversation with my marketing team of us together understanding of, well, what kind of value did a YouTube awareness video campaign generate? We're not expecting clicks. That's not how it's supposed to work. So what is it that we are, and this of course happens before the campaign runs, what is it that we're actually expecting it to generate? And then just kind of trying to see if those awareness or offline activations are actually driving those metrics, things like traffic to the website or organic search, for example.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think that in general, in your experience in marketing as a whole, but perhaps specifically when it comes to this SaaS, that marketers tend to focus on things that are easily quantifiable at the expense of what's actually having a lot of impact? Like we love showing MQLs or signups, and less interested in actually trying to look at hard numbers, whether it's revenue or something else?
Well, this might be a black and white view of the world, but then they're not very good marketers if they're not looking at revenue or actual business results. My team is targeting new customers, not leads or MQLs or even SQLs. The metric is new customers. And if we're not interested in revenue, then how are we ever going to be successful? And it is hard sometimes to draw the line between the marketing activity and the revenue. Like I said, it's not always linear, and there are multiple milestones in that journey. But if you have that common understanding of the fact that it is not easy, then it's a discussion. It's a continuous discussion. It happens all the time in the company, and then you can thrive in that environment.
So it's kind of incumbent on marketers to understand both the business very deeply, but also things like just being able to read a P&L so you can speak the language of the rest of the company, right? Is it?
Absolutely.
How would you recommend that? I mean, there was probably a lot of sources, but how have you done it personally? Like, how did you go from just having that kind of marketing perspective to then getting that holistic business understanding that allows you to be in the position you are at?
That's a good question, actually, because, well, I would assume that if you study marketing in a university, perhaps you are taught those things. And I didn't. I'm actually a journalist by education. So I actually never studied this, and I actually had to learn it through work. So I've been lucky enough to have both managers, but also just mentors in companies that I've worked at. And I've also been proactive. I've raised my hand and said, hey, I would like to understand this better. Can you explain it to me? And no one's ever said, no, we don't want you to understand this. This isn't your business. Like, why would anyone ever deny you the understanding of how business works? But of course, you have to be the one who's proactive and actually wants to learn.
That journalistic background comes with, I think, a lot of curiosity and kind of analytical and Ben probably helps a lot.
I ask a lot of questions. Yeah, I literally, I have a phrase I always say to my team that I am not questioning, I'm asking questions, because that's just who I am. But sometimes it can even come off as I'm questioning what they're doing because I'm asking so many questions.
That makes sense. We talked about CAC LTV. Just to kind of quickly circle back and talk about a little bit about metrics. Are those the two metrics, when they're properly understood and defined, as you mentioned, are those the two metrics that should be on the top of mind of every marketer, SaaS marketers, kind of at the top of their list? Or are there additional metrics that you look at as like these are absolutely crucial to understand what's happening?
SaaS marketers, yes. I don't think there's any scenario where you shouldn't look at LTV CAC. But it depends on what the business goal is. Marketing is, of course, there to help achieve whatever the goal of the business is. And it's easy to achieve a really good LTV CAC if you're not growing. If you have no ambitions to actually grow the company, just stay steady, not acquire a lot of new customers, then easy peasy. At Katana, we have very ambitious growth goals. So just looking at LTV CAC will not be enough. We used to look at free trials, top of funnel, the lead metric, but that was something I've now changed to looking at actual closed won customers, because I do believe that marketing plays a pivotal role in the entire customer journey, and not just the customer journey to customer, but actual generation of monthly recurring revenue. So LTV CAC, new customers, and in SaaS, MRR. Monthly recurring revenue.
And I guess, if all those metrics are heading in the right direction, then something is something, you're doing something right.
Something is working. And now it's just our job to constantly figure out what is it, what's working, and can it work better? Can we accelerate? Can we amplify? That's the fun part.
What about churn? So in the SaaS business model, churn obviously has a huge impact on LTV and the overall business success. Do you think that's something that marketing should be concerned with? Is it something that marketing can influence? Or how do you think about, is that the the responsibility of other business functions?
No, churn is definitely everyone's problem because the seeds of churn are planted way before the actual, when it actually happens. I think marketing is responsible for customer lifecycle. So before they become a customer, during when they are a customer, and yes, then also when they are a lost customer, because lost customers are often a really valuable target segment that you can potentially reactivate. But it's good to remember that while marketing really focuses on customer acquisition, whether it's net new customers or those churned customers, the value creation happens in between. The MRR is generated in between acquisition and churn. That's where all the revenue comes from. And if marketing is overlooking that, then we're not only leaving money at the table because we're not trying to activate the customer and provide value for them, but we're also probably planting those seeds of churn because we're not engaging them and making them feel special during their life cycle.
That's a really good point. And so if all the value happens in between, do you see it as a common problem that companies are incentivizing marketing through bonuses or just, based on what they're tracking to focus on everything that's not in between? And that has huge potential negative impacts on value creation. Do you think that that's something you're seeing at companies?
Yeah, it's. I think it depends a lot on the management. Yes, I see it at some companies, but then I live in this happy tech bubble where customer centricity is a really big thing, and focusing on customers, while it might not be the responsibility of marketing, and it doesn't have to be, that's what customer success teams are for. Marketing still can play a role and have input in that customer experience. So it's perhaps not as big of a problem in this sector, but it is a lot harder to, of course, get investment for it or resource it right, because it's not as easily measurable as acquisition or churn prevention.
Got it. You mentioned off air when we were talking that when you had left Smartly and you were looking for your next gig, you had a pretty good kind of clear view of what you wanted to do. Or what kind of company you wanted to work for. Can you talk about some of the criteria and why you chose them?
Yeah. I was incredibly strict about what I wanted for my next role, and Katana was the only one that ticked all the boxes. So I'm extremely grateful that I found them. A big thing, of course, was just the company culture, the fact that the management team and the founders care about not just what they're doing, but how they're doing it and are engaging the employees is just that. To me, it's a no-brainer. But still, a lot of times it's just said, not actually executed on day-to-day life. But at Katana, that's something that does happen every day. Another extremely important part for me was that marketing is a business driver. Like I said, I don't often see that in Finland, and I don't want to spend my days explaining to management or convincing a board of directors of why we should do marketing. I don't want to be constantly justifying my existence. I much rather do good things that drive business value. And at Katana, that's possible because most of the revenue does come from marketing sources. Marketing plays a pivotal role in the company's growth, and they wanted someone to help them accelerate that growth. So it was a business challenge, perhaps even more than a marketing challenge that I wanted to take on. And then the third piece, which is perhaps obvious, is that you had to have the resources to actually do it. We often see these impossible requests of, here's the growth goal, here are the resources you're given, now bridge the gap. Like, it doesn't really work that way. Marketing kinda is a coin-operated machine, so you do have to invest according to those business goals, and the resources were in check at Katana, so here I am.
It sounds that's awesome. You found something that ticked all those three boxes, and it's not. They may seem like really obvious things that companies should be doing, but I think it's also quite rare.
It's extremely rare, and I don't really understand why that is, because it's not really rocket science. It's actually, especially again in SaaS marketing, it's kind of just math of what you need to invest in order to get the output that you want. And it should be fairly obvious, but yet it somehow seems to be very, very rare, but hopefully getting more and more common.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
So when you started then at Katana, what was the first thing that you decided to do? What were kind of the questions you wanted to answer? What was the top priorities?
Yeah. Top priority whenever I start a new role would be to get to know the people, not the business, but the people. Then secondary, the business and the data and what's happening in the business. But because the people often tell you things that they see behind the numbers, and they can give you the context that you need before you look at the actual data and the numbers. So that was my first step, understanding the organization and the dynamics and how different teams and different functions work. And do they work? Is there room to improve the way that they work? Because a lot of times, even the data that you look at might not be relevant if there are underlying issues in the organization or the flow of work or the processes that are in place. Which was to some extent true at Katana. There were certain things that we changed both within the marketing team in terms of where we focus and what roles we have in the team and how we work together, but then also more broadly in the entire company, in the entire go-to-market function of how do we bring our product to market, how do we sell, how does marketing and sales teams work together, etc. So starting with that people component, I think that's important.
Absolutely. And you mentioned offline as well that one of the first things you did was creating a unified sales funnel, or funnel between sales and marketing. So you can talk about why you did that, what that looked like, and what the results have been.
Yeah, it's a unified funnel. That was the name of our project. We had a fairly enterprise sales process in place at Katana when I joined. So kind of a typical sales development rep first is qualifying calls and scopes out the deal, then hands it over to a sales rep for a close. And all of this happens in a complete silo where marketing has done something here, then sales does something here. There's absolutely no visibility to how these two things connect. So it was a project of both combining that funnel into one so that sales always knows what's coming in and marketing can actually monitor what the size of the pipeline is so that sales has enough pipeline to close enough deals to reach those business goals. But then also removing that step of sales development reps from the process because we're a small, medium-sized business product with that ACV of about 5,000. Doesn't really make sense. The numbers don't really add up. If you have a too long or too complicated, too heavy of a sales process, it has to be more streamlined, especially since about half of the revenue comes from product-led growth. So people who simply do a free trial, decide to use the product on their own. There is no human touch in between. So optimizing the entire funnel, making sure that we all look at it the same way was absolutely the first priority. We're almost there. Almost there.
That's such a huge project because it requires,
yes.
I mean, you have to get everyone to think alike, and that it's easier said than done for sure.
Yeah, again, it's that internal alignment that you need. And that's why I say I always start with people, because if the people don't agree, if we don't see the issues the same way or disagree on what priorities we should take, these types of projects become absolutely impossible to execute. You cannot execute a big shift like a go-to-market model change without the unequivocal support of the entire management team.
So creating that alignment, I suppose one or two of the listeners who are listening to this will be in a position where they feel, that's what we lack in our organization. Is there anything kind of tools that you've seen be particularly effective? Or is it just a matter of like bringing it back to the kind of numerical objective reality of like, hey, we need to, our ACV is this, therefore we need to spend, we have to change the model. Like, how do you get people convinced, especially when there may be people who are literally getting paid to work in a different way right now, and they're not very, let's say, eager to start changing their ways?
Yeah. Alignment happens between people. Doesn't happen between numbers or tools or functions, or it happens between people. So it's a stakeholder management exercise. I guess I'm quite methodical in how I approach stakeholder management. So I make sure I have regular meetings with everyone, and I do have agendas of what I need to discuss with different, not just management team members, but the senior leadership of the company, and also every single employee at the company. I have a method to that as well, making sure I'm available to everyone. And it's through those conversations that you build the foundation and the trust, and sometimes even those decisions that then lead to that alignment. It is my experience that it's more rare to achieve alignment in a management team meeting through a presentation where I present, everyone else is listening and they're nodding. The alignment is actually created long before that meeting happens, and it continues to happen after that meeting as well. So it's a stakeholder management exercise more than anything else.
That's interesting, because you highlighted, like, you need to have, in order to make it successful, you need to have both the authority and the resources, but then you also need to, you can't just ram it down everyone's throats. You actually also need to do that very tedious work of one-to-one explaining, building understanding. And I guess without both of those pieces, it's not going to work.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about explaining, it's more often than not about listening. Like, what is it that the other person cares about? What's important to them? And how does this thing that I want to achieve connect with that thing? How do I build a bridge between them? How do I make them care why my issue is actually important? So I think communication often is more about listening than actually talking.
Yeah, just as a side note, I think it's striking how often you come back to the fact that success in various completely different business functions can often be summed down into just interpersonal communication or empathy even. Like, it's such a huge unlock.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, success happens through decisions that are made by people, and often made when you are not in the room. So the impact you've created, or the perception that they have of you, has been created when you are not in the room. So it's all about, if every business is a people business.
Well said. So talking about some of the specific things you decided, the strategies you decided now to kind of deploy at Katana. So, the first thing you kind of realized was, hey, given our ACV, our business model, the way we're doing things, that's just not going to work. Like, it won't make sense. But when you have kind of then defined, your universe of potential things you could be doing, there's still a lot of different strategies, channels, tools, ways you could go about it. How do you have a process or framework for how you start selecting what you will be, which kind of tools you will be using?
Yeah, I think the first step is always to listen to smart people. Like what we've talked about now, it sounds like I'm super smart and I'm doing all these smart moves all on my own. No. I have both a really good team, but also the help of agencies, consultants, freelancers, our investors who have done this before with other companies. So just listening to other people, their ideas, their input is usually a really good catalyst to get to that thought process of, well, what could work here? Yes, there are some obvious things when you're in SaaS marketing. Most of it has to happen digitally anyway, so you have a limited amount of channels, and in SaaS, LinkedIn tends to be one that you can't overlook, so that's kind of an obvious one, but you still have to figure out how to use it. in what way do you want to utilize it? Like, are we talking about in-mail campaigns and like doing that SDR motion of just approaching people through LinkedIn? Or are you advertising? Are you doing brand advertising? Are you doing product advertising? Are you generating leads? So there are still a lot of choices to be made after the channel selection has happened. But again, it's an iterative process and you have to be able to experiment. If you want to grow, you have to be able to do that because the world changes all the time. Channels change, algorithms change. What works this year is not going to be the thing that works in 2 years. And growth doesn't happen overnight. So we need to be able to constantly experiment and iterate what we do.
How do you strike that balance between, on one hand, constantly experimenting and testing things, and then on the other hand, when we see that something's working, like, oh, we did this thing on LinkedIn, and not just this thing, but this like specific messaging or whatever it was, seems to be really working, and then trying to leverage that while it's working as much as possible. Like, how do you strike that balance between the two?
It's fairly simple, isn't it? You leave on the things that are working and you turn off the things that aren't working and come up with something else that's hopefully based, at least partially, to the things that are working. And again, if you're in a company that understands the value of marketing, then the things that are working are providing profitable revenue to the company, which then gives you leverage to ask for more budget for those experiments again, because you're constantly growing that baseline of revenue and it just building incremental streams on top of it.
Speaking of budgeting, how are you approaching it? Because what I'm hearing is it's really important to take a very dynamic approach. You know, if you find that something's really working, or let's say something happens in the external environment that causes the CAC to significantly change in whatever direction, how do you approach budgeting at Katana?
That's a good question, because this is the first time ever in my career, and I've been at Katana now for 8 months, so this is the first time that I'm budgeting at Katana. The first time ever that I am not given a budget, but I get to create a budget and tell what I need in order to reach those business goals. First time. I've been doing marketing almost 20 years. It's actually quite scary. It's really daunting to actually have the freedom of like, there are no excuses. If this fails, it's on me. So it's scary, but it's also an incredible show of trust to be able to look at our numbers, look at our data, understand what our cost per lead is in which channel, how many leads we need to generate with our conversion rate percentages that we currently have, and then do the back engineering from that of, well, this is what we need to create next year in order to reach our business goals. And then we just constantly monitor. If any of those attributes starts to change, like you said, then we'll need to make changes, and it's a conversation in the management. So it's not a strict line of this is the cost per action we can afford. It's a conversation where we then constantly make the decision of, well, can we afford a little bit more? Is there some other area of the business where we can scale down? Or is there another area of business that's working better at the moment? Like, is partnerships, for example, scaling faster? Then let's use the marketing lever down and put more bets into the partner side of things. So it's a constant balancing, but it's a conversation. It's not there's no algorithm doing the allocation for us.
It's like never-ending work, right? It's like you said, constant. Yes. It also sounds incredibly complex because you have, your marketing, you're selling across the globe, I would guess.
Yes.
So many different channels, so many different initiatives. Do you have any just personal framework that you use or way or approach that you use to just make sense of it and just feel like, oh, I am on top of this. I understand what's going on. Because I feel like it could be very easily quite overwhelming.
Yeah, my team is listening. They will be laughing because I have to say Monday.com. I mean, it's just, I can't live without Monday.com. It's the way that I organize my thoughts. But on a more broader scope, I think it really helps if you visualize your business strategy. I think some companies do this really, really well in just building a picture rather than a list or bullet points or a table where they tell who they are, what are they trying to do, how are they doing it, and maybe they have a few of those key initiatives listed there in a visual format, because then that's something that you can return to again and again and again. It becomes a tool of internal communication, but it really just becomes a tool of understanding and reminding yourself of what is it that we're trying to do. And when that is done really well, it's easy to then kind of map back the initiatives to that strategy as well.
I love that, because it's so easy to forget that we don't really, as humans, maybe with a few exceptions, we don't really resonate so much by numbers. It's more stories and pictures.
Yeah.
And just one thing that came to mind was that in the early days of Amazon, they would have themes for the year. Like one year, I think, was Get Big Fast, because they needed to get to a certain scale. And so everyone understands, okay, that's the overarching goal. So is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, kind of, yes. We at Katana, the way that we did it is our strategy visualization is, of course, inventory. We're an inventory management software. So there is a picture of, let's say, that warehouse where we have the different shelves of different initiatives and different motions that we want to do in order to reach that North Star that we have together defined as well. So yes, then it's in a visual format. So that's what makes it a lot easier to then also digest internally.
You've mentioned the team a few times. How are you thinking about how are you thinking about hiring and building a team that will be able to drive growth in a global market, in a very competitive market? Like, what kind of skill sets are you looking for, and also maybe what kind of personalities are you trying to build a team with? Complementary personalities or temperaments, or is it just about, we need this designer here, we need a copywriter here? How are you thinking about building a team?
Well, first of all, I am building a global team. I do think that we're shooting ourselves in the leg if we try to build a team that's only based in one location. That's just very difficult to do. Our customers are in North America, so I need people in my team that are North American so that they have that kind of same context, cultural understanding, vocabulary that our customers have. Personality is less of a factor, but it has become an interesting factor because we're working in a hybrid environment and we're working over video. So personality plays a different role than it did in the office, because often the people who are really loud and visible in the office are not on video, which is an interesting dynamic. It gives much more opportunity for introverts, but then again, kind of requires a little bit of a different, maybe a skill set as well. But overall, I think the most important advice I have in hiring is always, always, always hire the best possible talent and never settle. Because that's always when you also then fail. If you settle, if you think, oh, I just need a designer, oh, I just need a copywriter. There are very few instances where you just need a copywriter. You very likely need an excellent copywriter if you have ambitious international growth goals.
Totally. I feel like that's one of those very clear cases where saving money can actually become really expensive.
Exactly. And again, if marketing plays an actual pivotal role in your business, then that's not the place where you can save. It's almost easier to go without than to have a mediocre talent in your team.
So if the goal is to hire the very best, sort of kind of by definition, the very best, they have options, presumably people recognize that they're good. What's been your kind of like, how do you get those people to join Katana and to buy into to what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. A part of that is, of course, the culture and our employer branding and kind of truly living to our values, so that regardless of which cut and out you would ask the question, they would all say that it's a wonderful place to work. So it actually resonates then with potential employees as well. I think specifically in marketing, we have an extremely compelling situation when you have resources, because right now in this economic climate, that's simply not the case. Even in some of the most desirable employers in the world, they still struggle with resources. So for us, it's a combination of having those resources to play with, but then also the exciting growth phase of where you get to try and experiment things. It's not for everyone, and I'm super transparent about that as well. Like, there are a lot of people who really, really hate scale-up marketing. I love it, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's probably also really good advice, to be very clear in the beginning stage. I feel like companies can make the mistake of like, oh, we really want this person, so we'll paint a better picture. But the problem is, once they join and they realize, oh, this was not a good fit, then you'll have problems with retention.
Exactly. And with growth companies, time is money. You cannot afford to lose 2 months in hiring, then 2 months onboarding, and then 2 months realizing, oh, this didn't work, and start all over again. Time is money. You need to succeed on the first round. So you need to be honest, and you need to hire the best person for the job.
Easier said than done, but that's really good advice.
Exactly.
Is there any kind of final question here? Is there any specific resource, whether it's a book or online resource, that you find yourself going back to when it comes to understanding, let's say specifically SaaS marketing?
Oh my gosh. If someone writes a book about SaaS marketing, it's going to be outdated already when it comes out. No, specifically about SaaS marketing, I think events are really good source. Just hearing other companies' stories and what they're doing. So, and I mean, it's so easy now to listen to a podcast, go to an event, watch a video, and do that constantly. It is something that you actually have to do constantly. That's a requirement also, again, for my team. It's not an option to not follow what's happening in SaaS marketing, because it is changing all the time. You have to keep up.
And I guess also constantly be asking questions, as you mentioned.
Exactly. You can never be too curious.
On that very good note, Riikka, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Is there any place, are you active on LinkedIn, any place where people can follow or connect with you?
Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn, of course. So Riikka Söderlund is the name. You'll find me there. Not really active on other social media platforms currently, so you will see me speaking at events. So that's about it.
Okay, well, that's awesome. And thank you so much, Riikka, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. You can find all episodes of The Growth Pod on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts.